There are moments in war when courage defies reason. Moments when a man, surrounded by chaos and death, chooses not to retreat, but to climb. Imagine the scene. The air is thick with smoke. Arrows hiss like angry insects. From above, defenders pour molten pitch, drop stones, and loose crossbow bolts into the churning mass below. The ground is slick with mud and blood, the remnants of those who tried before. And yet, one soldier plants his foot on the first rung of a wooden ladder, presses his shield above his head, and begins to ascend. He knows what awaits. The top of that ladder is no gateway to life. It is a doorway to death. If he is lucky, he will die quickly, a spear through the throat, a rock to the skull. If he is unlucky, he will burn alive or be crushed under the collapsing weight of the ladder as others fall behind him. And still, he climbs. For over 4 millennia, this image, a man scaling a wall under fire, has echoed across the battlefields of history. It is as old as civilization itself, as enduring as humanity's thirst for conquest and glory. From the mud brick fortresses of Mesopotamia to the towering bastions of medieval Europe, the siege ladder became both a symbol of bravery and futility, a wooden bridge between two worlds, life and legend. The act of being first on the wall was never merely tactical. It was ceremonial, almost religious. To climb the ladder was to step beyond the ordinary bounds of fear and reason. To be the first was to embody the essence of valor itself. But what compelled men to do it? Why did soldiers, from Assyrian spearmen to Roman legionaries, from crusading knights to Ottoman janissaries, compete for the right to die first? Historians have long debated the answer. Some say it was greed, the promise of gold, rank, or privilege. Others speak of honor, reputation, or the hope that their name might echo beyond death. And for many, it was faith, the belief that dying for a cause sanctified the soul. Yet beneath these motives lies something deeper, something primal, a truth about human nature itself. Because when the world narrows to the width of a ladder and the roar of battle surrounds you, there is no time to think of gold or promotion. There is only the rhythm of breath, the pounding of blood, and the desperate conviction that your courage means something. Throughout history, societies have immortalized these men. They became the heroes of stone carvings, epic poems, and royal decrees. Their deaths became spectacles, proof that courage could be purchased by belief. The Assyrians called them the chosen of Ashur. The Greeks called them the glorious madmen. The Romans gave them crowns, corona muralis, the mural crown, the highest honor a soldier could receive. The Crusaders named them martyrs, and the Ottomans called them the blessed, for to die in the first wave was to die closest to God. But let us strip away the poetry for a moment and imagine the reality. A siege was not a single day of battle. It was a slow, grinding death. Armies starved outside city walls for weeks, months, even years. Disease spread through the camps faster than courage. Every soldier knew that when the final assault came, it would be brutal and likely fatal. The ladders, often crudely built from local timber, were heavy, slippery, and unstable. They had to be carried to the base of the wall under a storm of missiles and stones. Dozens of men would die just getting them in place. And yet, there were always volunteers. Always those who stepped forward when the call went out. Who will be first on the wall? It was not always the strongest or the most skilled who answered. Sometimes, it was the young, those still chasing the fire of glory. Sometimes, it was the condemned, prisoners offered freedom if they survived. And sometimes, it was the veterans, men who had seen too much and preferred a noble death to a forgotten one. In every age, these men shared something unspoken, a defiance of fate itself. And that defiance fascinated their leaders, chroniclers, and enemies alike. They were not just soldiers, they were symbols, proof that courage could be commanded, bought, or inspired. To understand what drove them, we must travel through time, to the first empires that raised walls and the first armies that sought to break them. For the story of the ladder is the story of civilization. The wall separates the civilized from the barbarian, the safe from the desperate, the powerful from the hungry. And every time a ladder was placed against it, it was humanity itself that climbed, reaching for what lay beyond. Our journey begins where all warfare began, in the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, the cradle of kings, and the birthplace of siegecraft. Long before the names of Alexander or Caesar were spoken, another empire had already perfected the art of war, the Assyrians. In the 9th century BC, the Assyrian Empire stood as the most terrifying military power the world had ever seen. Its armies marched from the mountains of Anatolia to the sands of Egypt, spreading fear with every step. But it was not their chariots or iron weapons that made them unstoppable. It was their mastery of siegecraft, the science of breaking cities. In an age when cities were life itself, storehouses of grain, temples of gods, symbols of power, to breach a wall was to conquer a world. The Assyrians knew this better than anyone. They built battering rams sheathed in bronze, siege towers that rolled on wheels, and ramps that turned rivers of mud into pathways for war. But their most daring weapon was not made of metal or stone, it was flesh and will. The siege ladder. Assyrian reliefs carved in alabaster, still preserved in museums today, show scenes of terrifying beauty. Rows of soldiers, their faces hidden by helmets, ascend ladders propped against the high walls of enemy cities. Arrows streak down upon them. Flaming torches are thrown from above. Yet they climb, their shields raised, their hands clutching the rungs slick with blood and oil. One relief from the palace of Sennacherib at Nineveh depicts the siege of Lachish in vivid detail. You can see it clearly, the walls of the Judean fortress rising high, defenders hurling stones and firebrands, while below, Assyrian soldiers swarm upward like insects. At the front, one figure stands out, his ladder almost touching the battlement, his arm outstretched with a torch, ready to burn the gates. He is nameless in the carving, but his courage is eternal. He is the archetype, the first on the wall. The Assyrian kings understood that such men were worth more than gold. Their bravery broke the enemy spirit before the walls even fell. To reward them, kings like Ashurnasirpal II and Sargon II offered immense honors, land, slaves, or elevation into the royal guard. Inscriptions praise those who first mounted the walls of the rebel city, listing their deeds alongside divine blessings. But these were not volunteers in the modern sense. The Assyrian army was a machine, driven by fear as much as faith. Cowardice was punished by death. To refuse to climb could mean impalement or mutilation. And so, courage and terror fused together, indistinguishable, inseparable. To the Assyrians, war was not just conquest. It was worship. Every victory was dedicated to Ashur, their supreme god of war. Every fallen city was an offering. And those who died first on the ladder were martyrs in his name. This fusion of religion, reward, and fear created the first recorded culture of heroic death. The man who climbed toward his doom was not seen as mad, he was divine. Over time, the idea would evolve. Other empires, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, would inherit it, reshape it, and celebrate it. But the essence remained the same: the wall, the ladder, and the man willing to die between them. Because in the end, siege warfare was not merely about engineering or numbers. It was about psychology. The moment the first soldier set foot on that ladder, both armies watched, the attackers with hope, the defenders with dread. If he reached the top, even for a heartbeat, morale shifted. If he fell, his death became an example, a reminder that courage had a price. And so, from the banks of the Tigris to the coasts of the Mediterranean, the legend of the first on the wall spread like fire. Long before the rise of Rome, before knights and crusaders sought martyrdom on distant shores, the Greeks gave death a language and courage a meaning. For them, valor was not only an act of the body, but a philosophy of the soul. The Greeks did not fight merely to survive. They fought to be remembered. From the ashes of the Bronze Age came a civilization that saw war as the testing ground of human greatness. Their poets, their philosophers, even their sculptors understood something profound, that in the fleeting moment between life and death, a man could touch eternity. Nowhere was this belief clearer than in the story that defined Western heroism itself, the siege of Troy, the fire of Cleos. For 10 years, the Greeks battered against the walls of Troy. They built camps, fought duels, and watched the years devour their comrades. The war was not over land or politics, but over reputation, over Cleos, the Greek word for immortal glory. Achilles, the greatest of their heroes, knew his fate before he set sail. His mother had warned him, "If you stay home, you will live long, but be forgotten. If you go to Troy, your name will never die, but you will." And he went. That choice, between survival and remembrance, became the moral core of Greek warfare. It turned every battle into a stage, and every soldier into an actor in the eternal drama of glory and death. When the walls of Troy finally fell, it was not through ladders or towers, but through deception, the wooden horse. Yet the story outlived the event because it captured something timeless, that men would risk everything to carve their names into history stone. From myth to reality. By the 5th century BC, that myth had become reality. The city-states of Greece, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, fought not only against Persians and barbarians, but against each other. And in their wars, the ancient ideal of Cleos took flesh again in the soldiers who scaled the walls of enemy cities. Unlike the great field battles that defined hoplite warfare, Marathon, Thermopylae, Plataea, siege warfare in Greece was brutal and personal. There was no phalanx, no formation, no shield wall of comrades. A siege stripped war of its order and turned it into chaos. It demanded individuals who would act when reason said stop. Greek historians rarely romanticize sieges. They describe them as hellish. The Athenian siege of Syracuse in 415 BC lasted over a year and ended in catastrophe. The defenders' walls grew faster than the attackers' siege engines. In the end, it was not just walls that defeated the Athenians. It was disease, exhaustion, and despair. But even there, in failure, accounts speak of soldiers who volunteered to scale the enemy's defenses in the final hours, fighting hand-to-hand on the ramparts until all were cut down. Their names were not recorded, but their deeds embodied the old Homeric spirit. For the Greeks, dying in the first assault was the purest expression of arete, excellence, virtue, the perfection of being human. It was not suicide, it was transcendence. Alexander and the ladder of the gods. Then came a man who would resurrect the spirit of Troy on a global scale, Alexander of Macedon. When Alexander laid siege to the city of Tyre in 332 BC, he faced an enemy that seemed untouchable. Tyre was not on land, it was an island fortress half a mile offshore, its walls rising straight out of the sea, glimmering in the Mediterranean sun. Its people were sailors, merchants, and survivors. They had resisted countless conquerors before him. But Alexander did not see an obstacle. He saw destiny. He ordered his engineers to build a causeway, a mile-long bridge of stone, wood, and debris stretching from the coast to the city. For 7 months, his men worked under constant attack. Tyrian ships burned their towers, archers harassed their laboris, and disease ravaged their ranks. Yet still, they built. When the causeway finally reached the walls, the ladders were raised. The Tyrians hurled stones the size of men, poured molten sand that burned flesh to the bone, and unleashed Greek fire upon the attackers. And in that inferno, Alexander's chosen companions, his heteroi, the king's friends, climbed. 2 names stand out from the chronicles, Admetus and Neoptolemus. Admetus, leading the hypaspists, was the first to reach the top. Neoptolemus followed, carrying the king's banner. Both were cut down moments later, but their sacrifice broke the defense, and when Alexander himself led the second wave, the walls finally fell. After the victory, the king offered prayers to Heracles, his divine ancestor, and ordered that Admetus and Neoptolemus be remembered as heroes. They had been first on the wall, and for that, they had entered legend. Their deaths were not isolated acts of courage. They were the living echo of the Homeric age, men seeking Cleo's Atherton, undying fame. The paradox of Greek valor. Greek courage was not blind. It was philosophical, an argument with mortality. To die first was not to throw one's life away, but to assert that meaning mattered more than breath. Even their tragedies wrestled with this idea. Aeschylus, the great playwright who himself fought at Marathon, wrote of warriors who died not for gold or kings, but for the name of Greece. The chorus in the Seven against Thebes mourns men who climbed the Sidious walls knowing they would not return, yet calls them the fortunate dead. In the Greek mind, the boundary between heroism and madness was thin. To be brave was to walk that edge, to risk becoming monstrous in pursuit of greatness. Achilles was both hero and destroyer, Alexander both conqueror and tyrant. The man who climbed the wall embodied both, courage that inspired and ambition that consumed. A culture of witness. Unlike later empires that codified heroism through medals and titles, the Greeks valued witness. Glory required memory, someone to see your deed, to tell your story. A nameless act was as good as none. This is why Greek warfare was so public, so ceremonial. The games, the plays, the poems, all were forms of remembrance. When a man scaled a wall and died, the chorus of his city would ensure his story lived. His courage became a mirror for others, proof that the gods had not abandoned mankind. And yet, behind this beauty lay horror. Archaeological evidence from sieges like Plataea and Olynthus shows the bones of soldiers who died crushed at the base of walls, tangled in ladders, their skulls split by stones. Their courage did not always buy victory, but it bought immortality in the collective imagination. From Kleos to Catabasis. There is a word in Greek, katabasis, meaning the descent. It describes a journey into the underworld, undertaken by heroes like Orpheus, Heracles, and Odysseus. To climb a siege ladder was a form of catabasis in reverse, a descent into death by ascending toward it. Each rung was a step deeper into the unknown. Each breath could be the last. And yet, the man climbed, not because he denied death, but because he accepted it. This idea, that true life is found in the defiance of mortality, would become one of Greece's most enduring gifts to history. It would pass to Rome, where it was stripped of its poetry and forged into law. And through Rome, it would survive for centuries, reshaped by empires, sanctified by religion, weaponized by kings. The siege ladder would remain the same, crude wood, shaking under the weight of men. But the meaning behind it would evolve, from divine offering to moral virtue to sacred duty. And in every age, the man who climbed first would remain the same too, a flicker of light against the darkness, a mortal daring to challenge the eternal. In the Greek world, courage was not just a virtue, it was a religion. To die bravely was to live forever in the songs of poets. And in the shadow of the polis, the city-state, no wall could stand without tempting the warriors of Hellas to test their valor against it. When the Greeks went to war, they did so as citizens, not mercenaries. Each hoplite, with his bronze shield and spear, carried not only his own life but the honor of his city. The phalanx was unity made flesh, a single, living organism moving forward under the thunder of bronze sandals. But when the enemy shut their gates and withdrew behind stone walls, that unity was broken. The siege was a humiliation to the Greek way of war. No courage could defy a wall. No formation could hold against silence and height. So, they learned to climb. At first, sieges were rare and clumsy affairs. Ladders, rams, and blockades replaced open field battles. Yet when Alexander of Macedon rose to power, he transformed the siege into a stage for immortality. The Tyre campaign, 332 BC. Tyre, the island city, stood defiant before the greatest army the world had yet seen. Surrounded by the sea, its walls were said to reach 150 feet into the sky. The citizens mocked Alexander from the ramparts, shouting that he could no more take Tyre than fly to heaven. So, Alexander decided to do both. He ordered his men to build a causeway, a mile-long bridge of stone and timber stretching into the sea. Under constant attack, Macedonian engineers worked day and night while archers covered them from floating towers. When the bridge reached the walls, the great siege towers rolled forward, their sides plated with wet hides against fire. And then came the moment. A young Macedonian named Pusestes, carrying the sacred shield of Achilles, climbed the first ladder and leapt onto the wall. He was struck again and again, but did not fall. Behind him came others, surging upward, turning that moment into legend. When the city finally fell, Alexander ordered the crucifixion of 2,000 Tyrians, a warning written in flesh, but he also rewarded the men who had climbed first, granting them gold, titles, and immortality in his chronicles. For the Greeks, to be first on the wall was not suicide. It was a bid for divine remembrance. Death was acceptable. Obscurity was not. The Roman inheritance. If the Greeks glorified courage, the Romans industrialized it. To Rome, courage was not a burst of passion, it was discipline. The Latin word virtus meant not only bravery but moral excellence, self-control, and duty. A Roman soldier who climbed the wall first did so not for fame, but because his commander ordered it, and to disobey meant death. The Roman legions were engineers of destruction. Each soldier carried tools for siege works, spades, picks, stakes, as naturally as his sword. When the legions encamped before a city, it was not a waiting game but a machine beginning to turn. They built ramps, towers, catapults, and trenches with terrifying speed and precision. At Numantia, Carthage, and Jerusalem, Roman soldiers fought not just enemies, but endurance itself. To scale a wall under fire was the truest expression of disciplina, unwavering obedience to command. The legionary who climbed first might die within seconds, but if he survived, he earned the corona muralis, the golden mural crown, shaped like the battlements of a wall. It was one of the highest military honors in Rome, surpassed only by the triumph of a general. To earn it, a soldier had to be witnessed planting the Roman standard first atop enemy walls. And there, under the scorching Mediterranean sun, a ritual repeated for centuries. A horn would sound, ladders would rise, and hundreds of men would surge forward. Some would climb only halfway before a stone crushed them. Others would burn alive under oil and tar. But one, just one, might reach the top. The fall of Carthage, 146 BC. When Scipio Aemilianus laid siege to Carthage, it was the culmination of generations of hatred. The city had held out for 3 years, its people starving but defiant. Roman siege towers crept forward while catapults hurled flaming stones into the heart of the city. As the walls cracked, legionaries rushed forward. Accounts tell of men fighting not for loot, but for a chance to be the first through the breach, the man who would claim the crown. They climbed over corpses, over burning ladders, over the screams of their comrades. And when Carthage finally fell, its defenders slaughtered or enslaved, Scipio wept. He saw not victory, but prophecy, that one day Rome too would burn, and others would climb her walls in turn. The Jewish revolt, 70 AD. A century later, another siege tested the Roman creed. At Jerusalem, the legions of Titus faced walls so formidable that even Roman arrogance faltered. The defenders fought with fanatic fury, hurling stones and fire from above, singing psalms as they died. Yet still, the Romans built their ramps, thousands of slaves working beneath arrows and molten lead. When the final assault began, soldiers of the 5th Legion scaled the walls under the shadow of the temple. One centurion, Gaius Longinus, was said to have climbed first, holding his shield above his head as boiling pitch rained down. He reached the top, planted the eagle standard, and was immediately cut down. His comrades avenged him by flooding over the ramparts in a wave of iron. The temple burned, and with it, an entire world. For Rome, first on the wall became more than a feat of courage. It was an act of faith, faith in the system, the empire, and the gods who demanded order through violence. Every ladder carried the same weight: the supremacy of Rome, the inevitability of conquest, the sacrifice of individuals to the glory of the collective. And when the empire finally fell, the ladders did not vanish. They simply changed hands. When the Roman Empire fell, its walls fell with it, not in stone, but in spirit. Europe plunged into a darkness where kingdoms rose and vanished like sparks in the wind. And yet, the idea of the wall endured. By the dawn of the Middle Ages, every lord's power was measured not in men, but in masonry. A castle was more than defense. It was identity, symbol, and soul. To take a castle was to erase a name from history. And so once again, men began to climb. In 1066, the Normans crossed the sea to England, armored knights led by William the Conqueror, the Iron Duke who believed destiny was forged with steel. When he landed at Hastings, he faced not walls but an army. Yet once he became king, he filled the land with fortresses, each a declaration of Norman rule. Within a generation, the skyline of England was transformed. Wooden Motte and Bailey castles became stone citadels, and soon, men who once farmed fields now fought and died scaling those same walls in countless baronial wars. For the knights of medieval Europe, sieges were the crucible of courage. In battle, armor and horse gave advantage. But before the castle, every man was equal, all weighed against stone, fire, and gravity. Chroniclers described ladders blackened by pitch, men crushed under falling stones, priests carrying crosses through showers of arrows, and the sky filled with smoke and screams. Yet through it all, one phrase recurs in medieval chronicles: "And he was the first upon the wall." It was the same formula of immortality spoken thousands of years before in Assyria and Rome. But now it carried a new meaning, not imperial, not civic, but sacred. In 1095, when Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade, he promised that those who fought for Jerusalem would win absolution. Heaven itself awaited those who died under the cross. For men of the 11th century, this was irresistible, a merging of faith and fury, sin and salvation. The Crusaders marched east through blood and dust, across Anatolia and Syria, until they reached the Holy City itself in 1099. What followed became one of the most infamous sieges in history. The defenders, Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians, watched from the walls as the Crusaders built towers and ladders beneath the desert sun. They fasted, prayed, and swore that God would deliver the city. From the north came the army of Godfrey of Bouillon, from the south, that of Raymond of Toulouse. As siege towers rolled forward, the air filled with the drone of horns and the roar of prayer. When the towers reached the wall, the first ladders were raised. Knights and peasants alike climbed into a storm of arrows, stones, and fire. Chronicles describe Godfrey himself, his golden hair gleaming beneath a battered helmet, standing atop a siege tower, crossbow in hand. When a breach opened, he leapt onto the wall and cut down the defenders. Behind him, his men followed, crying, "Deus vult," God wills it. What followed was slaughter, streets running red, corpses piled in alleys, temples burned to ash. But to the Crusaders, it was divine justice. And to those who climbed first, it was salvation. They had not merely conquered a city, they had ascended a ladder to eternity. In the decades that followed, the Holy Land became a chessboard of walls and sieges. Castles like Crac des Chevaliers, Margat, and Bellois rose across the Levant, masterpieces of fortification that seemed to merge heaven and earth. And standing upon their battlements were men who lived only for the next siege, the knightly orders. The Templars, sworn to poverty, chastity, and obedience, and the Hospitallers, defenders of pilgrims and cities alike. To these warriors, the wall was both battlefield and altar. They prayed before battle, confessed their sins, and then hurled themselves into the storm without hesitation. In their chronicles, to fall from a ladder was not shameful, it was martyrdom. The Muslim chronicler Ibn al-Athi, writing from the other side, recorded their ferocity with awe. They came like waves of the sea, black with armor, silent as death, and they climbed while the arrows fell upon them as rain upon stone. In the east, the Muslim world too sanctified siege bravery. The defenders of Aleppo, Damascus, and Jerusalem believed that to fall from the wall in jihad was to enter paradise. The Ghazi, the holy warrior, was promised that his blood would smell of musk, and that angels would carry his soul from the rampart to heaven. In those centuries, East and West shared one thing. They believed that walls were not obstacles, but gates to eternity. By the end of the Crusades, the Christian hold on the Holy Land had withered to a single stronghold, the coastal city of Acre. When the Mamluks came to destroy it, they brought with them siege engines that dwarfed anything seen before, massive trebuchets hurling stones the size of oxen, towers higher than the city walls. 4 weeks, the air thundered. The walls cracked. Inside, Templars and Hospitallers prepared to die. When the final assault came, eyewitnesses wrote that ladders lined the walls like a forest of wood and iron. Mamluk warriors climbed, shouting the name of Allah, while Christian knights met them with sword and axe. At one point, the Templar Grandmaster, Guillaume de Beaujeu, wounded and bleeding, still fought on the ramparts. When told to retreat, he answered simply, "I am not running away. I am dead." Moments later, he fell where he stood. Upon the wall he swore to defend. Acre fell. The Crusader dream ended. But the image of men climbing ladders through fire and faith endured. They believed the walls of Jerusalem would bring them closer to God. Instead, they found that heaven was not on the other side of stone. It was above them, unreachable, silent, and watching. The medieval siege was a theater of extremes: faith, terror, loyalty, and despair colliding in one narrow space. To climb first was to live inside a miracle or a nightmare. Priests would walk among the soldiers before the assault, offering absolution, reminding them that those who died would awaken in paradise. Many men wept openly, not from fear, but from belief. Those who survived later confessed that the climb was like a trance. Time slowed. The sound of screams became distant. Some claimed to see visions, angels on the battlements, or devils pulling them downward. Psychologists today might call it dissociation, adrenaline, or shock. But in the medieval mind, it was grace, the moment of transcendence when man ceased to be mortal and became a weapon of God. When the smoke cleared, when the cities burned and the Crusades faded into memory, one thing remained constant: the wall, that eternal test of human will. And soon, it would face a new kind of enemy. Not the knight or the martyr, but the gunner, the engineer, the man with powder and flame. By the 15th century, the world of ladders and torches began to crumble under the roar of cannon fire. Stone, that eternal defender of kings, was no longer invincible. Gunpowder had changed the language of war. For the first time in history, walls could die. The fall of Constantinople, 1453. It began before dawn on May 29th. The city that had once been the heart of the Roman Empire, Constantinople, the Queen of Cities, stood trembling before an army unlike any the world had seen. The banners of the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II rippled like storm clouds across the horizon. For 53 days, the cannons had thundered. The Great Bombard, cast in bronze and weighing over 30 tons, had torn open the ancient Theodosian walls that had withstood 1,000 years of siege. Yet, despite the destruction, the defenders, Greeks, Venetians, and Genoese, refused to yield. In the final hours, when the city walls were breached, chaos became divine. The Ottomans surged forward, shouting Allahu Akbar. The defenders cried Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy. Ladders rose once more, as if the Middle Ages were taking one last, desperate breath. Eyewitnesses described Janissaries, the Sultan's elite corps, climbing into a storm of arrows, boiling oil, and shattered stone. They were no longer warriors born of faith, but soldiers born of discipline. They sang not hymns, but military chants. They fought not for salvation, but for empire. The first man over the wall that day was a Janissary named Hassan of Ulubat. Carrying the green banner of Islam, he scaled the rampart and planted it in the breach. Moments later, he was pierced by a dozen arrows and fell. Behind him came 30 more, all struck down, but the banner did not fall. When Mehmed entered the city hours later, he ordered that Hassan's name be remembered. And so, even in the age of gunpowder, the ancient ritual endured. The first on the wall, the first to die, the first to be immortal. The cannon and the courage of engineers. As firearms spread across Europe, the meaning of courage shifted. The heroes of siege warfare were no longer the climbers but the builders, the engineers who constructed bastions, angled walls, and subterranean mines. The age of the fortress began. Star-shaped citadels like Verona, Antwerp, and Vauban's masterpieces in France. Walls no longer reached for the sky. They sank into the earth, angled and thick, designed to deflect cannonballs instead of arrows. But even in this world of geometry and mathematics, the same human drama played out. Miners dug tunnels beneath the walls, working in suffocating darkness. They could hear the enemy digging from the other side, striking through rock, racing toward one another with explosives. When the mines met, men fought underground, in the flickering light of torches, with daggers and shovels, for the right to destroy or to survive. And above ground, when the final breach came, infantry still charged. They climbed shattered rubble instead of ladders, but the terror was the same: smoke, noise, blindness, the stink of blood and powder. At the siege of Breda, the fall of Tenochtitlan, the storming of Vienna, the same ancient cry was heard: forward, take the wall. They no longer climbed for gods or kings alone. They climbed for the machinery of nations. The death of the wall. By the 18th century, siege warfare had become a science, a cold and predictable process. Artillery dictated the rhythm of death. A city could be measured by how many days it could withstand bombardment before surrender. The courage of the individual seemed almost irrelevant. And yet, men still found ways to prove themselves. When Napoleon's armies stormed the fortresses of Europe, his engineers advanced under withering fire to plant explosives at the gates. At Zaragoza, Moscow, and Badajoz, soldiers scaled breaches through walls of smoke and debris. One French officer wrote in his journal, "We no longer climb walls, but we still climb toward death." The first on the wall became the first through the breach. Different tools, same fate. The age of total war. By the 20th century, the wall had transformed entirely. Trenches replaced towers, bunkers replaced castles, and machine guns made ladders obsolete. But the psychology remained. When the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy in 1944, they did not carry ladders. They carried faith, fear, and a sense of duty no less fierce than that of the Crusaders or Romans. The first men to step out of the landing craft at Omaha Beach faced walls of steel and fire more terrible than any medieval battlement. They climbed cliffs under machine gun fire, scaling rope ladders while comrades fell around them. And still, they climbed. Across the world, from Stalingrad to Iwo Jima, humanity proved that courage does not die when tools change. The wall had become metaphorical: the enemy's trench, the concrete bunker, the ideological barrier. But the essence remained the same: to go first, knowing you might not return. History is not kind to the men who go first. Their names are forgotten, their faces lost. And yet, without them, no city would fall, no empire would rise. The Assyrian scribe, the Roman centurion, the Crusader knight, the Ottoman janissary, the modern infantryman, all are echoes of the same eternal figure. The one who steps forward when reason says no. The one who climbs into fire, not for glory, but because someone must. When we look at the walls of history, the ruins of Nineveh, the ramparts of Tyre, the stones of Jerusalem, the broken gates of Constantinople, we're not just seeing monuments of conquest. We are seeing the fingerprints of those who climbed. They remind us that courage is not the absence of fear, nor the promise of victory. It is the willingness to rise, even when the sky itself is falling. And so long as walls are built, whether of stone, steel, or ideology, there will always be someone who dares to climb them first.